Welcome to the Holy Post. It was a wild weekend. Donald Trump presided over a military parade on his birthday, while an estimated 5 million Americans protested around the country. This week, we discuss the optics of both events and ask, with America's divided politics and media silos, is protesting still effective? Then we unpack a new article at CT that argues evangelicalism's focus on a private, personalized faith actually undermines learning, curiosity, and exercising the mind. Then I talk with theologian and Holy Post pundit Michael Bird about his outsider's perspective on Trump's military parade, the No Kings protests, and what he thinks Christians should be most concerned about. He argues it's the suspension of habeas corpus. Also this week, more 50s slang and an update on Ed the Zebra. We have a whole lot of great stuff on Holy Post Plus this week as well, including a bonus interview with Mike Bird about whether or not he thinks open theism is a heresy. We've got a new episode of Getting Schooled by Kaitlyn, and on the Skye pod this week, I interview the author of a new book about the history of American Christianity and sports, which is actually fascinating. And don't forget that Holy Post Plus subscribers can get access to each chapter of my new book as I write it. It's called The World Born in You, Letters to a New Generation of American Christians. I'll be hosting a live stream next Monday night where you can interact with me about Chapter 1. So to join the wider Holy Post media community and join Holy Post Plus, you're going to want to go to holypost.com and learn all about it. Here is episode 674.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Holy Post podcast. I'm Phil Fisher. I'm here with Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hi, Phil. Happy birthday, Phil.
Oh, what?
Happy birthday, Phil.
It's my birthday.
It is your birthday.
Oh, my goodness. It's my birthday. What do you know? Actually, today. Actually, right now. Today. This
Not while you're listening, but.
Not while you're listening. It's not Wednesday. It's Monday. Monday, as we're recording this, it's my birthday. So now you know what my birthday is, y'all. So you have no excuse next year to not know.
So it's also Beth Moore's birthday today.
It is. It is. Beth Moore and I share a birthday.
You're not the same age though.
Me and Beth Moore? No, she's older.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't share the entire birth date.
Caitlin's offended.
Out to the
Rude.
year. Well, she's older than I am. What?
I
That's because we're born on the same year. She was born before me. So that's why she's so much wiser.
Okay. Compliment. That's
one
good.
reason.
Yeah. Although I did learn something. Oh, and Kaitlyn Chess is also here. Sorry, I was derailed.
By the happy birthday greeting?
Yes, thank
Before
you.
I could finish the introductions. And yes, I know she's still not full-time in the theme song, and it's still on my to-do list to change it. So
listen, Phil,
stop
you know
throwing
what?
rocks.
You've got like 2 months before I live there. That would be
that
could be a good timeline.
Good, yeah, we can coincide with her move.
Oh, yeah.
Just an idea.
Oh.
In fact, Kaitlyn could be in studio and you could do your own voice on that part of the song.
No. No one wants that.
Or we could have children sing it out.
Oh.
Oh boy,
The Holy
Don't
Post
hate
Children's
that.
Choir.
I don't think she's not gonna let go of that idea very soon.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post.
And sometimes Kaitlyn.
This episode is sponsored by Minnow. Hey, summer is right around the corner. It's almost time to head to the beach or the pool with your kids. Rather than picking up another set of cheap kids' swimsuits from the local discount store, take a look at Minnow. Minnow makes premium swimwear for kids that you'll love. Timeless designs, great fabrics. Every Minnow suit is thoughtfully designed with comfort, performance, and protection in mind. They're UV blocking for sun protection, easy to put on and take off with just the right amount of stretch. Buttery smooth fabric and quality that'll last through multiple seasons. Plus, coordinating suits for mom and dad so your whole family can look classy together on vacation. Check out Minnow's best sellers, the girls' rash guard one piece, boys' boardies, and unisex rash guard shirts. Elevate your family's style with quality swimwear that will last. Go to shopminnow.com and enter code SHOPMINNOW15 at checkout to receive 15% off your first order. That's shopminnow.com, code SHOPMINNOW15 for 15% off.
You know that I'm a skeptic. I like things to have evidence, proof, data. I like to research things before I commit to them. And that even goes for my supplements. I want to know that they're high quality. That's why for the last year I've been drinking AG1. Unlike many supplement brands, AG1 conducts relentless testing to set the standard for purity and potency. I know I can trust what's in every scoop of AG1 because it's tested for 950 contaminants and banned substances, while the industry standard typically only tests for 10. AG1's ingredients are also heavily researched for efficacy and quality, and I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut health. So, if you want to replace your multivitamins and your digestive aids, your immune support into just one simple scoop, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 and K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription at drinkag1.com/holypost. That's drinkag1.com/holypost. Go check it out. And thanks to AG1 for sponsoring this episode.
I got to do a couple of things. Last week, you and I were searching, and you couldn't search because you're too impossibly young. We were searching for phrases from the 50s that implied...
I am also too young, Phil. I resent that.
But you're old enough to have watched Happy Days,
yes.
Not in reruns?
When did it end?
Well, I don't know.
No, it was not in reruns when I was alive.
Yeah, 75 probably. 4.
I was born in 76.
You were? Yeah. Oh, maybe you didn't.
I'm looking it up.
Yeah, we're looking it up. Anywho, we were looking for phrases that imply, because you said, what did you say you were last week?
What?
You said you were hunky-dory.
No, it wasn't.
Hunky-dory?
Oh, yeah.
Oakley
And
dokley?
I'm not.
And you weren't hunky-dory, and so we were looking for the 1950s inverse. And I said, not really thinking about it, of course, hey, if you know what it is, send it in. And so people did.
So what did we find?
So we got bummer. I don't know if bummer is 50s originating, but are you bummer right now, Kaitlyn? Are you downer? Is this a downer where you are? And is that from the 50s? I'm not so sure. And then and how about these? Are you feeling under the weather? Because I say that all the time. Actually.
Really? That's only as old as the 50s?
Ill.
It is. It's ill.
Yeah.
It's ill.
Yeah. Not like sad.
Are you ill? Are your tests making you ill?
No.
And then and the last one that I got was, are you off your feed?
Off my feed?
I have no idea what that means. Is it a farm?
That sounds like an internet term.
Right.
Well,
that's
yeah.
what I was thinking.
It's either you've lost BuzzFeed,
I am off
you've
my
lost
feed.
your access to your news feed, or maybe it's an agricultural term like, wow, that horse is off its feed. It's not feeling well. Maybe. And then I'm not sure. So I'm not convinced, dear listeners, and I do appreciate the effort, dear listeners. I'm not convinced any of these originated in the 50s. I don't know. But because bummer is kind of
It's universal.
It's universal, but it was also kind of a slacker stoner thing. Bummer dude, Oh, bummer dude. Like Cheech and Chong. I say Cheech and Chong made it up in the 70s. And I know that I'm probably wrong about that.
Yeah.
Because it does So I don't know. Keep sending them in because I'm not convinced we've got it yet. I'm not convinced we've hit on the 1950s originated inverse of I'm feeling hunky-dory.
The last episode of Happy Days was titled Passages, and it aired as 2 parts, and it aired May 8th, 1984.
No.
That's what it says.
Oh, it wasn't an early 70s show.
It was set in
When did it start?
Now you're asking.
That's a different question.
Well, wouldn't that be on the same Wikipedia page?
I'm not on Wikipedia. I'm using Chat GPT.
Oh, there's your problem.
Oh, gosh.
You just
Skye.
used the electricity of an entire U.S. household for a year to do something that Wikipedia could have done for free.
The first episode of Happy Days aired January 15th, 1974.
Wow.
It was a 10-year run.
No way.
Yeah.
I had no idea. That's why we all got so attached.
11 seasons.
We all got so attached to Richie Cunningham.
And the Fonz.
Yeah, and the Fonz. Yeah, and Henry Winkler and Richie Cunningham. We also got an update on Ed the Zebra.
Oh.
From someone who followed the story much more closely than I did.
Ed the Flying Zebra.
He says, Alice says, I had a great Aunt Alice. She accidentally burned my grandparents' house down, but that's a different story. Alice says, and I don't hold it against you, Alice, because I know that you're not the same Alice. Concerning Ed the zebra, there was so much more to the story. His real name was actually Zeke. So the guy who bought him named him Zeke. The public named him Ed.
Why?
Because they didn't know what his real name was. He was just showing up.
And they went with Ed?
He was showing, yeah, that's what the public. Because
Who's the public?
It's wisdom of the crowds. It's the people that were posting about him in social media.
Some individual had to.
Someone started.
The collective came up with Ed. Okay. He jumped his 6-foot-high fence.
I didn't know zebras jumped that high.
Well, either did the guy who bought a zebra. So we all learned something. And went on the run. The public gave him the name Ed. He was very elusive. Zebras are legal. It's a bunch of statements. It's like bullet points here.
Yeah.
I got a whole bunch of bullet points. Zebras are legal to own, which
I told
we
you.
looked that up and figured that out. The owner had a bunch of other random animals and just thought it would be cool for his kids to show their friends. See, show and tell's coming up. What are we going to do this year, Dad?
Expensive.
I'll buy you a zebra, and you can ride him to school, like in...
What other animals?
Are you taking notes for future ideas?
Me?
Yeah, what are you writing down?
I'm writing things down. What?
I could just send this to you.
No, I'm not. There's a method to my madness. Okay. Wait a minute. What other animals did he have?
A bunch.
Just
Alice did not tell me. Okay. That is not one of the bullet points.
I will say Zeke is a better name for a zebra.
No, I don't like
Absolutely.
it. No,
Absolutely.
I don't like it. Zeke the zebra.
Yeah,
that's hard to say. That's hard to say. It doesn't flow.
I like it.
Yes, it alliterates, but there's so much more to life than alliteration, Skye. I know you were a pastor for too long. You preached one too many 3-point sermons.
Kids, animals, that's cute.
Zebra Zeke, that might be okay.
Zebra
but
Zeke.
Ed.
Zebra, Zeke the zebra.
It's a more ironic name. The owner had a bunch of other random animals. Zebras, and I think this is an important bullet point for the rest of the story. Zebras are aggressive and mean. Ed was in a meadow, not a fenced pasture when they caught him. I think I said pasture. He was in a meadow. So they brought in the people who delivered the zebra. They brought them in the helicopter to tranquilize Ed/Zeke and then airlift him out.
So he was tranquilized.
He was tranquilized.
But he was awake.
He was awake.
He was just sedated.
He just looks a little sleepy in his zebra bag as he's flying through Middle Tennessee. The owner is probably not going to keep him. That's the last update.
Yeah,
and what do you do with an unwanted zebra?
What do you do? What do you do? What do you do with an unwanted zebra?
You were going to do the Klondike bar, weren't you?
No, I was going to do, what do you do with your dead friend chicken? What do you do with your dead friend chicken? What do you do?
I don't know that song.
Now that he's gone. Clearly, the owner got in over his head. That's the last bullet point from Alice.
That's why I want to know what other animals he has. What are they potentially going to be let loose?
Are they also alliterated in their naming?
Alice?
Yes.
I really appreciate what you've done for us. Kaitlyn and Skye, on the other hand.
No, thank you, Alice.
Want you to fill in every last detail of this story. But if you could tell us, we would love to know, what other animals does he have? Random animals. Because that would be curious. And are any of them jumping out of their 6-foot fences?
Kevin the kangaroo, Tony
They have
the
alpacas,
tigers.
bison, and cattle.
Who? What
the owners?
You just
of
looked
Ed the
up.
zebra.
You just looked up the owner of Zeke, because he's not probably doesn't answer. Maybe that's why no one could catch him, because he doesn't answer to Ed.
They kept yelling Ed. You're so right.
Ed.
So Zeke is
there another zebra out here named Ed?
Zeke is short for Ezekiel, right?
Obviously.
I guess.
So could Ed be short for Ezekiel, like Ezekiel?
No. No, Skye. No, Skye.
No.
Starts with an E.
No, Skye. It could not. No.
Ezekiel.
No.
We had quite a weekend. I'm trying to keep this moving because we want this to be, we want our audience to get a good value for their dollar.
Right. We want this stories moving like a parade.
Yeah, like a military parade. Mm-hmm. But do you want your stories moving more like a North Korean military parade or an American military parade? Because our military parade, it just looked a little sleepy. I found.
I didn't watch very much of it.
I bumped into it live streaming, and it was just like a single tank. I mean, there were more than one tank, but the feed from the grandstand was just a tank driving slowly in front of a grandstand, and then a howitzer driving slowly, just one, not like what, when you see the North Koreans or the Russians do it on, it's like a whole formation of tanks.
Right.
And they're all driving at exactly the same speed, like they've been practicing.
With one guy out the top saluting, facing the dear leader.
And this just seemed more like somebody said, hey, there's Ed, the guy who always brings his tank out on the 4th of July. Would you drive your tank down
Constitution Boulevard, whatever it's called.
Last weekend was a little nuts. We had a military parade in D.C. We sponsored by a cryptocurrency company and a beverage themed to professional wrestling. The ads for those came up.
How very American.
We had mass protests across America.
Were they sponsored?
Also American.
Estimated as many as 5 million Americans took to the streets over the weekend, possibly the largest protest in U.S. history. So there's something. We had Israel and Iran trying to blow each other up.
That is ongoing.
All weekend. And also today.
Right.
And today, yeah.
And then, as if all that wasn't crazy enough, we had, like, when was the last time we've had a political assassination?
We've had some attempted ones.
We've had some attempted ones.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Right.
sheesh, the shootings in Florida of
Minnesota.
Minnesota. Why did I say Florida? Because it seems like something might happen in Florida. The shootings in Minnesota of 2 state reps by a man who, as people dug into his background, was an evangelical Christian and sometimes evangelist. Have you seen footage of him preaching in
I saw a headline. I did not click on it.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah. He shot, 4 people, killed Melissa Hortman, the Democratic State House Speaker, who taught Sunday school in her spare time. So we have now hit a point where we have Christians killing other Christians because of their politics. And I'm not saying that has never happened before in human history, because I'm very, very well aware of how often that has happened in human history. But it really seems like we were beyond that. Okay.
What are we doing first here, Phil? You've just rattled off a lot of things.
I know. I'm just saying this was our weekend.
Yeah.
Typically, any one of those, you'd say, oh, we should discuss that.
Right.
But it's just too much. It's just too much. So, military parade. You didn't even watch it, so you can't comment.
I watched enough of it.
Oh, okay.
Just to see a tank or two and soldiers.
Tank or two.
A tank or two.
Tinker and tanker.
Here's the thing. When I was flipping back and forth between Fox News and CNN. And CNN had wall-to-wall coverage of the No King protests around the country. And Fox News had nonstop coverage of the military parade in Washington,
That's the only
D.C.
thing that was going on.
I just thought it was interesting to kind of juxtapose the 2 silos of media consumption. And what I came away with was that the message that was trying to be conveyed by the military parade was, we're strong.
Mm-hmm.
We are tough.
Mm-hmm.
We like guns and tanks and men in uniform and military stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then you flip over to the protests, and I felt like the overwhelming message that was trying to be conveyed by the protesters was, we care.
Mm-hmm.
We care about immigrants. We care about our neighbors. We care about the Constitution. We care about rule of law. We care about all. We care versus we're strong. And that kind of feels like the divide in America to me. Between those who want to say we're strong and those who want to say we care. I don't think those are mutually exclusive, but they feel like you have to pick one or the other now.
Yeah. So here's my question. Of all these stories, where was the church in these news stories? Where did we see the church showing up this weekend? Did you see it? Did you see, oh, look, there's Christians?
I did see protest signs that sometimes referenced Jesus or scripture or Christian ideas.
Okay.
But
I knew a lot of Christians who were at the protest, and a lot of them who went in some capacity with their church. I knew people at my church
My
who went to
small house church almost protested in entirety, very close to the entire small house church, went to the protest together, including my 82-year-old mother. So where did we see the church over the weekend? Well, we saw it in many Christians that were at the protests. We also saw it, not surprisingly, in online MAGA Christian personalities that were hating on the protests and mocking them on social media. And also picking up fringe theories linking the political left to the assassination attempts. Some very fringe theories. Because if it's something bad, somehow it had to go back to them.
Well, but don't you think whenever there's one of these horrific events, there's a mad rush to figure out what was the politics of the perpetrator. So we can use that terrible event to demonize one side or the other. And in the fury to figure that out, sometimes bad reporting happens. But the very instinct to first and foremost, I mean, I guess in this case, it's a little different because it was an explicitly political assassination.
Yes.
So politics comes in. But even when it's not, like it's a horrible school shooting or something like that, everyone wants to know, what was their politics? It's like, can't something just be evil for 30 seconds before we put a red or blue label on it?
Well, when someone goes on a spree shooting Democrats,
I know, that's different.
It's a little harder not to question.
Yes, that's fair. But still, our politics just runs over our humanity so quickly.
Yeah. Kaitlyn, what had your attention this weekend?
My exams. So I was thinking though, I really truly have not been like fully in the world of all of this stuff and was reading a lot this afternoon after my first exam about some of these things. And it's interesting. It was a weird juxtaposition because my first exam this morning was on political theory, and I wrote a whole paper for one of my exams on Protestant resistance theory and how that informed American political theory. And some of what's happening this weekend is a good example actually of some of the limits and different approaches to expressing your discontent, right? Like shooting people because you disagree with them politically. Like there's a long history of people thinking that those are the options available to them. Protest, there's a long history of people thinking that that's the best option available to them. And I just was so struck in reading some of the online responses to it, how little thought Christians in particular have put in to how our larger theology informs how we think we might engage politically, which is not a shocking thing for me to say. But these are good examples of like, actually, where is the line? Like, it's easy when you see someone murdering Democrats to say, well, that's definitely a line. You don't murder people for your political goals. Protests, okay, yes, that's a good thing. You should do it. We also saw protests in LA last week that turned violent in some instances. Not all of them, but some of them did. And then there was great violence sometimes to incite the violence from the protesters coming from law enforcement. So you think it's really clear cut. Where is the line to be drawn in how to express your dissent from the larger political structure that you're in? But it's actually really hard to know where the line should be drawn. And we have a lot of rich Christian resources for thinking about that. And I don't think most people are aware of that like some of these questions have been asked before and really thoughtful answers have been given, and trial and error has helped people realize, not just what is theologically sound, but also what seems most effective to achieve the goals that you have.
Right.
Okay, toward that end, what do you think, let's say 5 million people did assemble and protest in various cities around the country this weekend. What do you think that accomplished? Other than those people feeling some solidarity with one another in a shared concern, does it make any difference?
Well, I think if you can say factually this was the biggest protest in American history, and it was against the sitting president, I think you've made some kind of a statement.
Okay.
Never before have Americans turned out in these numbers to protest the policies of a sitting president.
How do these numbers compare to the ones in 2017, the Women's March and all that happened all over the country?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because, I don't want to describe, I know many people who did go to these protests as well, and I sympathize with their concerns for sure. To Kaitlyn's question, though, about Christian political thought and what are the lines and what are the right things to do, not do, what does a protest of this sort accomplish? other than sending a message? To what end?
I think that's what you're saying.
But to what end is that message? Because at the end of the day, in a democracy, aren't we ultimately trying to say we need to vote differently?
Yeah, but you're encouraging other people to say, wow, I was uncomfortable with this, but look how many other people are uncomfortable with this.
So it's solidarity.
Yeah.
That was my point. It's really, people don't feel alone in their concern.
Well, but also politicians that are worried about re-election are looking around saying, ew, because Trump doesn't care. He doesn't care. I don't care. But if you're just a run-of-the-mill Republican or Democrat in a district and you're looking for your re-election chances, you say, oh, that was a lot of people.
I wonder if there's a comparison of the size of protests in various cities and how that changes in red state versus blue state, or red cities versus blue cities. And, are Republican politicians in red states, do they care less about this because things are so gerrymandered and separated that it's like, who cares? It's not enough to make a difference.
Skye, you're asking questions I cannot answer.
Okay.
Alice, can you help us?
Kaitlyn.
I was going to say, someone's going to think that you think my name is Alice. I have wondered this too. I mean, I live in a very progressive city, and whether it was Palestine and Gaza questions and Israel, whether it's immigration stuff, sometimes there were people gathered here for the protest this weekend. There are people gathered for all sorts of protests. And sometimes it's like, I'm driving to my favorite coffee shop and there's a bunch of Duke students on a street corner holding signs about something that I'm like, everyone here agrees with you. Like, I don't know why we're doing this. This is not so I feel that frustration sometimes of like, are you going to post a picture on social media and that'll make you feel really good and people will think you're great? And this is where the virtue signaling thing is actually kind of legitimate, that people are curating a version of their lives that shows like, I have checked the checklist of like, I'm a good person, political views. But on the other hand, with this protest, one of the things I was thinking about, again, taking my exam this morning and prepping for it the last week, is it's also not clear at what point in your history is it going to feel like we've gone too far. And I think a lot of the early days of this Trump administration have been people asking like, wait, is this the tipping point where like you can't go back from this overreach of executive power, from this detaining of people without due process? Like, how do I know when like we've lost completely the ability to stop this? And I do think something about coordinating protests across the country says something to just there's a limit to how much you can talk about awareness, or like, yes, we all have all the news and but the solidarity I don't think is just like, I'm not alone in feeling this way. I think it can be like, we're tracking, right? Like, we're aware that this is the point we're at, and we want to be aware that if the next thing happens, there is some concerted effort. There have been some networks created. There's communication across different cities and with different groups of people. And in many cities, it was like churches and community groups and people from different neighborhoods realizing they were all on the same page about some of these things. And I don't know how much protests like this really convince people who think differently. That's been some of my frustration, honestly, is sometimes Christians I know who are posting a lot online about the protests and making really strong statements, and it doesn't seem like they're really interested in having conversation with people that they actually might be able to change minds in their local community. But I'm really thankful for the ways that I think for a lot of people it helped them feel not just like connected to larger networks, but something that is a real problem in our politics, especially with the internet, is a complete lack of sense of agency. And sometimes it's fake. Sometimes it's like you felt like you did something and you didn't really do something. Sometimes it's like, was this a stepping stone to realizing that you actually have some agency in these situations? You're not helpless to the social forces around you. It's not like this is a stone rolling down the hill that no one can stop. And there is real value to that.
Yes, Skye.
I'm asking questions here.
Yes,
I'm not.
It's a good question. It's so good.
Like, I think over the last 20 years, we have seen a series of protest movements. I'm thinking back to like the Tea Party movement during the Great Recession, the Occupy Wall Street movement, the BLM movement. We saw the Gaza protests last year at universities all over the country. Now we're seeing, and we saw the Women's March in 2017, the Me Too thing. Now we're seeing this one with No Kings. It's like, it feels to me like online expression, when people get upset enough, they're like, okay, enough with social media. We actually need to physically gather.
Yeah, we need to go outside.
We need to go outside and make this
touch grass.
Right. And that's fair and legitimate. And I do think it definitely creates a sense of solidarity, a sense of belonging. It captures more cameras. But having seen this over the last 20 years, I'm just wondering, what's the lasting impact of these things? And why doesn't it translate into more permanent changes in voting? Like,
because
I
there's
just think,
always another side.
Well, Yes, but that's the point, is we are so divided as a country and we live in such different media silos that I have a feeling a lot of the people who were watching Fox News and the military parade saw almost no coverage whatsoever of the protests and vice versa. Yeah. And so even though you can have millions of people at Daley Plaza, or thousands of people,
tens of thousands,
fine, but millions of people around the country, doesn't mean the other half of the country that might benefit from hearing their point of view are ever going to encounter it.
If they tried to drive through downtown Chicago at 1:30 on Saturday afternoon, they would have noticed.
And I'm sure they left totally in support of those protesters.
Okay. Yeah.
Not frustrated at all.
My mother told me how many cars went by her little group of older women holding their signs and flipped them the bird. Mm-hmm. So they definitely got noticed.
There is, I think, a really important point to be made that it is both easier and kind of like cool and sexier to do protesting and to, again, post your pictures on social media, et cetera, than it is to really learn the complicated legal processes that produce a lot of the conditions that you're protesting. I mean, this has been true since the civil rights movement. Sure. There's been conflict between the people who want to work in the system, who are forced to make some compromises to get some things done, to get some laws passed, versus the people who want to be the prophetic protesting voice. Yeah. And I think there's a role for both of them. Mm-hmm. The problem is, in the age of social media, one of them is a lot more accessible and gets you a lot more immediate social benefits. And so there's probably going to be more people that want to choose that one.
Yeah, and I don't want to discourage anyone from protesting. It is our First Amendment right. I think there's benefit to doing it. I'm just saying we've seen a series of these things now for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what the fruitfulness, does anyone look back and found what's the outcome of these things?
I agree that in the 60s, if 1 million people marched and it was on CBS News, anchored by Walter Cronkite, America would know about it.
Right.
And that doesn't happen as much anymore, although following right-wing Twitter, it's all over right-wing Twitter.
Along with conspiracy theories.
Well, with belittlement.
Right.
You know, if you're belittling, it means you think something has to be covered. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you just ignore it. I need to talk about Abby McCloskey, writing for Christianity Today. Have you heard of Christianity Today?
It's come up in my
it's a publication,
in my feed.
It's a publication I've enjoyed for quite a few years. She was working on a book about Christians, American politics, and the challenges of faithful and nuanced Christian engagement, unique to this moment. But as she wrote, she says, I came to think those challenges are rooted in a larger problem for American evangelicalism, a Christian mind out of practice. And she references, of course, Mark Noll's book, The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind, which is like 30 years old now, right?
Older.
It was 90s. It was early 90s.
Really?
Yeah, or mid-90s. The American evangelical mind is not in good shape. For too many of us, faith is a private affair that exists largely in our own thoughts. Yet those thoughts are not particularly deep. Oops. And she says, you know, there was an argument to be made. Jesus himself praised a childlike faith, but faith does not require anti-intellectualism. And indeed, anti-intellectualism is a perilous situation for our faith, especially in an era as cloudy and complex as our own. She says her childhood in the conservative evangelical church of the 1980s was defined by focus on the personal pursuit of an individual relationship with Jesus. After accepting Christ into my heart, she says, I understood the primary activities of the Christian life to be sharing the good news with others so that they could be saved from hell and fixing my own hope on the afterlife. In other words, there was really nothing to concern yourself about the here and now.
Right.
Other than getting people off of it.
Off of the here and now.
Yes, off of the here and now into the there and then. That idea of Christianity as a one-time soul-saving decision inadvertently deceived us. We came to think, or at least to act, on the assumption that our minds, having been redeemed in Christ, would be able to see all kinds of things clearly without really having to try. I hadn't really thought of this in such stark terms, but it does resonate because
totally.
I think she and I are about the same age, or maybe I'm a little older, but I was, I came of age in 1980s evangelicalism. Mm-hmm. And it really was, if you were in youth group, it's like, okay, don't have sex and go evangelize. And that was kind of it. Read your Bible, don't have sex, share your faith. Read your Bible, don't have sex, share your faith.
Kiss. Keep it simple.
Yeah,
stupid.
and then for a brief window, don't do anything satanic. That was big for just a brief, 3 or 4 years.
That was just added in.
Don't do anything satanic. Don't rock music.
Because you thought you could put that in the same category, but
Yeah. So,
But she's talking about this idea that once you're saved, you don't need any experts to help you with anything because you have the Bible, you have the Holy Spirit.
It's
Is that
not
it?
even about experts. It's just about the
thinking.
Thinking's irrelevant.
Because you have the Spirit, and so she goes back in history and says this is a significant deviation from much of church history. There is a great tradition of applied wisdom in our faith. Christian intellectual curiosity developed as an act of humility and submission to God. And many of the great thinkers through modern history, from the last 2,000 years, were Christian thinkers, partly because they had free time because they were clergy, and so they didn't have to work in the mines or the mills. But also partly because Christianity created a separation between creator and created, which implied that what was created was ordered, was physical, and could be studied.
And that there was an order to be found.
Yes, there was an order to be found. So she says, learning from other Christians, past and present, helps us wrestle past our assumptions and toward the truth. The Christian mind cannot grow alone or on the empty calories of screen time. We are meant to be in community. Christians should be, of all people, the most aware of the most insidious characteristic sins of our culture: consumerism, constant distraction, alienation, hidden exploitations. We should be committed to a biblical perspective on political and ethical issues, even when it requires us to cross party lines. We should be champions of science and fact over superstition and convenience. So this made me think of, because I've been bumping into this, I just bang my head into this over and over again, how much of our society and evangelical culture is driven by bucket ethics.
Bucket ethics.
Yes, you want all your ethics to fit in one bucket, and someone else, you pick the bucket. Like, am I a Republican? Do I hold the Republican bucket of ethics? Am I a conservative? Am I a liberal? And I hold the liberal progressive bucket of ethics. And then you say, and I'm a Christian. So what's the Christian bucket? And then you have different voices telling you what the Christian bucket is. And you pick the voice that you trust. And then you don't have to think about any of the issues. You just say, oh, that's like, okay, so here's my example. Bring up in a circle of theologically conservative white evangelicals, basic universal income, or lump sum cash support for the homeless. Okay, both of which have been studied in small scale tests and actually found to be surprisingly effective. Bring them up in a circle of conservative Christians, and you're a Marxist. You're so quickly, it's put in the bucket of anti-Christianity that you can't even have the conversation. You can't hold up the data. You're not even given the opportunity to hold up the data. Well, here's an experiment that they did in Vancouver, and it was this many people for over this period of time, and here are the results. It doesn't matter. That's Marxist. That's socialism. You're out.
Right. I think you have buckets. The more accepted term is bundle.
Fine.
Like certain things get bundled together.
Carry your ethics however you want to carry your ethics.
And
mine are in a bucket.
And if your bundle that you've inherited doesn't include universal income or lump sum payments to the poor or homeless, whatever, if that's not in your bundle, then it doesn't get a hearing.
But those are generally new ideas, so they're not in anyone's bundle.
Yeah, but they're associated with political and theological views that are not in the bundle. Giving money to people who are poor sounds a lot like socialism to a lot of folks. This article felt a little bit to me like she was grabbing evangelicals by the shoulder and shaking them and slapping them across the face and saying, would you please think? Just think.
Yes. Right.
Instead of blindly accepting your bundle and rejecting everyone else's.
Thinking requires actually considering evidence for and against.
Yes.
That's all I'm saying.
Yes, that's exactly right. But it's an interesting brief recapitulation of Mark Knoll's ideas from 30 years ago that evangelicalism has a problem with thinking.
It seems pertinent because conservative Christianity, particularly white evangelicalism, has been so influenced by the ethics presented on right-wing media. So, starting with Rush Limbaugh and going through the Daily Wire and Charlie Kirk, who are telling us which bucket/bundle each idea or policy issue belongs in, which shortcuts any real thought process for us. So, for example, and this is where it gets personal because I'm getting whacked with some of this stuff. Megan Basham's book. Have you heard of Megan Basham's book, Shepherds for Sale? Yeah, I'm in it. You didn't make it because, maybe next year.
Because I'm not for sale.
Maybe because of your incredibly high ethics. And this is true, Allie Beth Stuckey with her book, Toxic Empathy. In fact, the whole anti-empathy movement in evangelicalism, when you drill down on it, it's because it's motivated by seeing some Christians promoting progressive causes because we care about people. So if you care about people to the point...
God must be so angry.
If you care about people to the point where you would agree with a progressive solution, you've left acceptable behavior for what? For a Christian? For our tribe. And that's when you boil down like Basham's book, what it really is, it's about political tribalism.
Right.
It's like these people who call themselves Christians are not loyal to our right-wing political tribe, and therefore they must be shamed.
All right, I want to get Kaitlyn in on this too, but doesn't
Is she here?
Doesn't Abby McCloskey's argument basically boil down to this, that evangelicals are more committed to tribal loyalty than they are to thoughtful, critical examination?
She doesn't say tribal loyalty.
I know, but that's the undercurrent here seems to be...
Yes.
Tribal loyalty is more significant than investigation.
Kaitlyn's sighing a lot, and I talked so much, she didn't have a chance to say anything. So, okay, Kaitlyn, help, Kaitlyn. I know you've been saving it up. Either that or you fell asleep for just a little bit because you're tired from all your studying.
No, I did not fall asleep.
Help it up.
I want to defend people a little bit.
Okay.
Which is to say that everyone, especially in this moment in our history, is dealing with the fact that we are faced with an onslaught of an impossible amount of information to digest at basically every moment. And so it is a natural and very human response. And this is true, biologically and socially, and there's been lots of people who have researched this, that when you have way too much complexity in the world, the way that you handle it is by using bundles or buckets, or you have to find some way to simplify the fact that every single political issue, I mean, to your point just now, Phil, about these lump sum versus overtime payments to people who are homeless, it's that is one incredibly specific policy that deals with something that is huge and structural and complex. And that's one area of how you deal with poverty and homelessness. Then you deal with every international conflict. Then you deal with every other domestic policy issue. And it is perfectly reasonable that people will just outsource some of their discernment, to use, I believe, Skye's language, to a pundit, to a media outlet, to whoever. It makes perfect sense. And I just want to first say that there's that. It's just a simple way of dealing with complexity and an onslaught of information. And then the fact that if you go to a group of people who hold similar theological or political views truly across the spectrum, and you say something that doesn't fit neatly into the categories as they have them, there's also such a polarized political environment that it's really hard for people to just take new information and go, oh, there's data on that? That's interesting. Let me evaluate that. And everything feels heightened. The stakes feel very high. Everything feels like a threat to your sense of identity and community. And so you end up in those situations. I see it colorfully and where I live all the time on the progressive end of the spectrum, where people can offer really interesting studies that contradict some progressive talking point, and the reaction is swift and fierce. And what I appreciated about her piece was both saying, we want to think more deeply about things, but there can be a way to say that is really just a finger wagging about reading more books, which I love to do to people. But I appreciated that she was also just recognizing you need curiosity and you need humility and you need to recognize that you are a fallen and a finite creature that cannot know all things. And to her point, part of the reason that there is such a rich history of Christian scholarship and study, not just of theology and biblical studies, but of all sorts of areas of human knowledge, is because we recognized it's actually pretty fundamental to the study of something that you have enough humility to know that you don't know everything about it. And so I appreciated that lens, because it's a lot easier to encourage people to learn more and think more deeply when you're saying, like, the world is interesting and amazing, and it is good to do this, and being curious and humble is more joyful and human and good, instead of the wagging your finger or shaking your shoulders and saying, like, do some more reading, which I understand and I want to do. And I even think some of this problem stems from a lot of the people who do read a lot of the books and think a lot of the thoughts, assuming people don't want it or are not capable of it, and so they don't give it. I can't tell you how often I've been on a church staff or been talking to people who work in churches just in the area of theology who have been like, oh, people won't be able to handle that book, or they won't be able to handle that Bible study. And sometimes that's true and helpful. I've been in academia for way too long. My idea of what words people are familiar with has already been kind of messed up by this world. But I also think you can overcorrect, and you can go get your education and then come back to the church and think, oh, you guys just need like the bottom shelf stuff. When part of the reason people are content with the bottom shelf stuff is because you're not showing them like the beauty and wonder and amazing things that are out there that they could be experiencing. Right. And the same is true with science and history. And when we treat those things, to her point about evangelicalism, when we have treated those things as threat to simple faith, or when we've treated them as too difficult for the average person to understand, it's made it harder for them to want to like explore those things with joy. We've just kind of, whether we've said stay away from those things or read more of those things, we've tended to have a naggy attitude about it instead of saying, like, this is beautiful and amazing, and you have the joy of getting to experience it.
Do you think Mark Knoll got a little bit naggy in his book? Is that what yours?
He's a lovely man. I loved that book. I don't think he's naggy. I just think that people who read him and felt smarter than other people because they read him have been naggy.
I think, Kaitlyn, to back up a little bit to something you said that I thought was so important. You're talking about the value of curiosity, and certainly when we communicate that with joy, it works better. You catch more flies with honey than vinegar, as they say,
I think
right? That's part of it. But the other side, you said it earlier, but I want to come back to it. When people are afraid, that's going to shut down their curiosity. And what's happened with this bundling, these buckets that Phil is talking about, is you can take an idea that is non-essential to Christian faith, like lump sum payments to homeless people, and you can debate whether or not that's a good policy, a bad policy, whatever. But when you present that and somebody immediately codes it as that's progressive or that's socialist, or that it's anti-Christian, and then they feel threatened. Their faith becomes threatened by it. It shuts down curiosity. So when you bundle everything together, that's how you get these books you mentioned, these anti-empathy books that say all of these things that are not creedal to our faith are actually a direct threat to our faith, which shuts down all curiosity. Until people understand their faith, until they recognize what is essential and what is not, it's hard to be curious and open and humble about ideas that are either neutral or completely peripheral to our faith.
So what do? We got to wrap it up because we're running over time. So how can we help?
I honestly think part of it is certainly the joy that Kaitlyn's talking about and helping people have wonder and curiosity about the world. But I also think part of it is, if our Christian communities did a better job of communicating and teaching people what is essential to our faith, then it opens up the field for people to not feel threatened about everything else they bump into.
Yeah.
And until we do that catechesis, it's really hard to get people.
And who gets to decide what's essential to our faith?
Let your denomination figure that out, and some of it is in the creeds.
Half of us don't have a denomination.
Okay, I'm just saying, like, this is a failure of Christian
Creed,
teaching.
Apostles' Creed.
Right.
Didache.
That's what I was looking for. Those are only doctrinal statements. They're not practice. They're not.
I added the Didache. We should maybe.
Wait a minute. Didache?
Is that how you say it?
That's not, I don't think you have the accent correct.
How did you say it?
Didache.
What?
I've never heard anyone say it that way. It's probably lost to history how you say it. I don't know.
Oh, like Augustine and Augustine?
That one is decided. And it is Augustine.
Wow.
Oh, boy.
I've always heard Didache.
Okay.
We're having a dust up.
Here's the one other thing I want to say, though. Besides the creeds, yes, and this is going to sound self-motivated, but it is true. In the line of answer to your question, Phil, about what we should do, genuinely...
Read the books of Kaitlyn Chess.
No! We should hang out with little kids and listen to their questions about the world and God and the Bible, because not only do they have very good questions, they also genuinely Like, they embody a posture that is important for us to have. I feel like sometimes people think my thing with kids is just like a shtick because I think they're cute. It's not. Genuinely, Jesus said, be like little children. And I think one of the things Jesus meant by be like little children is be curious and humble. I don't think he meant just like take things as they're given and nod and say yes. No one could say that who's ever been around a child. They ask so many questions about everything. And that posture is not done from fear. The reason they can ask so many good questions is because they're not afraid of being wrong. They haven't learned yet there's things you're not supposed to ask. And we should hang out with them so we can learn to be more like them.
And I hope that when you're hearing the questions of children, you can steer them away from the questions that sound a little socialist.
No.
Because they have to know, or they have to know. This direction is Christian, this direction is socialist. And those are the only two. No. Okay. I hope you all listened to Kaitlyn's podcast episode about heaven, because it was fantastic with lots of little kids talking.
Thanks,
the more
Bill.
kids, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Agreed.
Kaitlyn. Maybe that's just me. I don't know.
No, it's me. That's me. Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah. Okay, everybody. Thanks for coming along. We got a guest. Who's a guest? Do you know who the guest is?
I believe it's going to be Michael Bird.
Mike Bird.
Yeah.
Oh, he's fun.
We're going to record late tonight because he's in Australia.
Oh, Mike Bird, fun late night with Mike Bird. Oh, I can't wait. That sounds fantastic. And we'll see you next week. Bye. This episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. Hey, if you're like me, you want to use your money to do good in the world, to support causes you really believe in. But by the end of the month, your money's all gone. Maybe it's because, like me, you've got like 50 subscriptions, half of which you don't even remember signing up for. That app for your kids that they used like once, that delivery service, the fitness plan that didn't work out so well. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills and free up money for the things you really care about. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has helped save its members an average of $740 a year, with over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. I can see all my subscriptions in one place, and Rocket Money will help me cancel the ones I'm not using with just a few taps. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/holypost. That's rocketmoney.com/holypost. rocketmoney.com/holypost. And thanks to Rocket Money for sponsoring this episode. This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored in part by our friends at World Relief, the Christian humanitarian organization we trust to tackle the world's greatest challenges. Right now, they're helping refugees rebuild their lives here in the U.S., while also providing aid to people who've been uprooted from their homes by the recent earthquake in Myanmar, and so much more. As you may have heard on this show, shifting policies and major funding cuts following recent executive orders have put their work at risk. But you can help. Right now, head to worldrelief.org/stand and join The Path, World Relief's monthly giving community. Your gift of $50 a month provides critical aid like food, water, and shelter when and where it's most needed. Will you turn your compassion into action? Become a monthly partner today and walk alongside families in crisis. Visit worldrelief.org/stand. That's worldrelief.org/stand.
Michael Bird is no stranger to the Holy Post. In fact, he's a Holy Post pundit, and he's been creating a special series of videos for us at Holy Post Plus called Between Christ and Caesar. The videos explore how Christians are responding to government persecution in difficult places all around the world. And that's one of the reasons I wanted him on today's show. We've seen protests erupt all over the country, a military parade in Washington, D.C., and accusations that President Trump is abusing his power and ignoring the rule of law. So I wanted to get Mike Bird's perspective as an Aussie who is outside the American church context, but also firmly rooted in the wisdom of Scripture. Michael Bird is a deputy principal and lecturer in theology at Ridley College in Melbourne, Australia. He's the author of over 30 books and the host of the Ask NT Write Anything podcast. Here is my conversation with Mike Bird.
Mike Bird, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Great to be with you, Skye, and all the friends at Holy Post.
Yeah, well, you are a Holy Post pundit, and you've been doing some really great work on this series that is in Holy Post Plus, Christ and Caesar. You're exploring what's happening in different parts of the world where Christians are legitimately persecuted, and the way that different regimes in India, Ukraine, Myanmar are a factor in that, as well as fundamentalist religions that are opposed to Christian presence in those countries. And it's illuminating because there are so many Christians here in the U.S. who want to claim persecution or the threat of persecution to justify their politics in various ways. We've had some interesting events happen this weekend, and as an outsider, as an Aussie, and as a New Testament scholar, I wanted to get your take on some of these things. The first thing we want to start off with, though, is the military parade, I guess is the right word, the military parade in Washington, D.C. this weekend. I know there have been others in American history, but it's a very rare thing. And to my knowledge, the last time there was anything that came close to this, it was following the first Gulf War in the early 90s as a way of celebrating America's military victory and heroism and all those kinds of things. But this is a little different because although it was presented as the 250th anniversary of the formation of the Army, the fact that it fell on Donald Trump's birthday gave it a whole different vibe. So as an outsider, what was your take on America having a military parade on our president's birthday?
Well, Skye, I've got to tell you about my morning routine. I get out of bed, I wake up my kids, I make myself a bowl of instant porridge, add a little bit of fruit. I then sit down in front of the TV and turn on what's called Haystack News. That gives me highlights from CNN, ABC, European news. And I sit there eating my porridge, looking at what dumpster fire has been set alight in America overnight. And it never disappoints. There's always something interesting. Now, with the military parade thing, celebrating the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army is something worth celebrating, and that is worthy of a parade. And military parades around the world are not uncommon. I served in the military. I served in the Australian Defence Force. We have what's called Anzac Day, which is on the 25th of April every year, and normally that's when all the veterans get out on march. I mean, I don't know whether veterans march on Veterans Day, but, you know, that's something that we do. Other countries have something to celebrate their history of military valor or military accomplishments or great battles.
We have Memorial Day every year. We do have Veterans Day. 4th of July is often a time where we celebrate the military and veterans. So it's not an unnormal or an unusual event here in America, for sure.
But I agree, doing it on Donald Trump's birthday as a kind of, it seems to make it just as much about him as it is about the history of the U.S. Army.
Yeah, it's also worth noting, I mean, this 250th birthday of the Army did not sneak up on them. It wasn't a surprise. They have known this was coming, and they had extensive plans for various events around the country this year, and a military parade in Washington, D.C. was not one of them. So this was Donald Trump's specific request. It's something he wanted to do during his first term, but the generals at the Pentagon and other military leaders denied it for very good reasons, I think. But because of different leadership in this second administration, especially at the Pentagon, he got his wish. So it's very evident that this was not the Army's intent. It was purely done to please the commander-in-chief. And the fact that it was his birthday, I'm sure, was a factor.
And I think that's the disturbing part. I mean, no problem with celebrating the U.S. Army, no problem in celebrating the great valor and bravery of the men and women who have served in the U.S. Armed Forces. But, you know, in some countries like Cuba, they have military parades on the president's birthday. So I would say this is less like what France does and closer to what Fidel Castro used to do. So it's less Macron and more Castro in what seems to be going on. And that's the bit. And in Cuba, people tell me if you don't turn up to the parade, you can get in trouble. Your neighbors might dob you in that, you know, Jose and his family weren't out there with, you know, pictures of Castro and waving Cuban flags at the parade. So you can get in trouble for not turning up to some of these parades.
Well, that was clearly not the case in Washington this weekend, because quite a few people did not turn up to this parade.
Yeah, and that's the bit that's like, okay, at least people are not being dragged out of their homes and being given American and MAGA hats and being told to celebrate. But why you would make this about yourself is an act of self-aggrandizement that is needless, and I think it takes the gloss out of celebrating what is a very noble military tradition.
Someone mentioned that, I don't know what the final bill is going to be for this parade, but the Army itself estimated it might be as high as $40 or $50 million. And someone calculated that that's enough money to house and feed every homeless veteran in America for 6 months, which seems like a better way of honoring our veterans than this parade may have been.
I agree. And I saw advertisements that it was sponsored by crypto and UFC.
Yes.
Which, now that struck me as weird. Like, we don't have sponsors for our, Veterans Day parades in Australia.
I think the added piece of two parts as an American that strike me as odd beyond the things you've already mentioned. One, my assumption is that some other countries regularly have military parades as a way of displaying their strength because they're insecure about their strength. The United States has never had to do that, at least in my lifetime, and probably since World War II, at least, because no one has questioned our strength. It's evident we do have the most powerful military in the world. So if you have it, you really don't have to flaunt it. That's number one.
Exactly.
But number two, it's out of character for our country because when you look at polling, Americans are obviously very divided on a lot of things, and many institutions in this country have now become polarized or partisan in their perception. But the one institution that is most universally validated, valued, and seen as nonpartisan is the military. And that's because the military leadership and our political leadership, for the most part, has restrained itself from politicizing the military. But this seemed like a major step towards using the military as a partisan prop for a president on their birthday. And that's a little gross because if we make the military in America partisan, that doesn't bode well for the future of this country.
I agree. And in Australia, this is something we value very much, that we have a civilian government and the military works for the civilians.
Right.
I remember, I'll give you two incidents in Australia that speak to this. There was the Minister of Defence was talking about something, and he had a couple of generals beside him as he was talking. And he then switched from defence policy to talking more about politics in general. And the generals who were with him then said, "Excuse me, Minister, I have to move. I don't want to be in the screenshot while you're talking about politics." So the general very consciously said, "Look, I'm no offense, but I'm moving away from you because I do not want to be seen next to you while you're talking about politics." And there was also an ex-military guy who then went on to serve in politics, but he kept on trying to use pictures of himself in military service to kind of advertise why you should vote for him. And the military censured him, saying, "No, you can't. You can talk about your military service, but you can't have a big billboard of yourself about your military career because we want to separate the military from our political establishment." Now, that's something I think the US military has generally shared, the idea that they are the ones who sit above the table. They don't engage in the squabble of party politics. Now, at one level, you can't be 100% out of it because, the Pentagon's got a label for budgets and budgets can be partisan. But generally, the US military tries to stay out of the dirty fray of politics. And I think you can see the Trump administrations 1 and 2 have definitely tried to politicize the military by making appointments that are based on politics rather than competence, such as I think is the case arguably with your recent appointment as Defense Secretary, who I would say is probably not the most qualified person. I don't think of Fox News pundits as the people I want to lead any nation's military, for my mind.
Yeah, I mean, the politicization, I keep stumbling on my words tonight. It goes directly against U.S. policy. I mean, I just looked it up. The Uniform Code of Military Justice, Article 88, prohibits contemptuous words against officials, and booing is considered unbecoming conduct when in uniform. DoD Directive 1344.10, this policy states that active duty service members prohibits them from participating in partisan political activities or actions in any form while in uniform. And so there have been other videos that have come out of events that Donald Trump has done at military bases where large numbers of uniformed military members are booing or cheering in different ways, in explicitly partisan ways. And it's not, the rule's not being enforced by this Pentagon. No one's being, reprimanded or court-martialed or anything for this clear violation of the code of conduct because it's in support of Donald Trump. And
this parade is yet another move in that direction. And it concerns me that we are taking one of the more nonpartisan institutions in our country and adding it to the list of those that are partisan. It's not good for anybody. Let me ask you this, though. Given your exploration of what's going on in different parts of the world, authoritarian regimes and persecution of Christians in those places, many authoritarian regimes use the military as a arm of their political will. They engage in military parades like this. What is the general function of these sorts of parades in other contexts?
I think it's partly for domestic consumption. Like, look how strong we are. We have tanks and we have missiles and we have soldiers who can march in step. But it's also for foreign propaganda, kind of saying, like, don't mess with us because we're armed to the teeth and we can bring the thunder if we have to. But like, as you're alluding to, it does betray a slight insecurity. Like, people who have to flash out their big sword or their big guns are compensating for the fact that deep down they're a little bit scared or they're a little bit insecure. And despotic regimes are vulnerable. They're vulnerable because no one passes on bad news. Every time you tell the dictator bad news, he punishes people. So what happens is people don't tell the dictator the bad news until it's too late and it can't be hidden. And this is what happens in a lot of countries. And this is why I think a lot of regimes around the world are a lot more fragile than they realize, because people are telling the dictator or the ruling class that everything is fine and dandy. But as you go further down the echelons of power, down to the grassroots level, you find out everything is not fine. They've got like a lot of corruption. They've got a lot of technological problems. They've got a lot of efficiency and combat readiness problems that no one's telling their superiors about. So so they kind of compensate for that, for these lavish, over-the-top displays of militaristic power. And it's designed to make them look as a military fit and powerful regime, when in reality they may not be.
So I usually associate these kinds of displays with authoritarian regimes. They're not typically done in democratic societies. I think of China, I think of the Soviet Union, I think of North Korea, you mentioned Cuba. The one exception to this, which may have played a role in what happened here in the US, is France. The story is that Donald Trump in his first administration, first term, was in France for Bastille Day. And apparently the tradition in Bastille Day is a parade that includes a lot of military displays. And he loved it. He thought it was fantastic. And that's what planted the idea in his head back in 2017 that he wanted to do this at home in America, but the generals got in his way. What's the explanation for France as an outlier, as a democracy, regularly doing military parades?
Yeah, well, I can't say I'm a history of French military parades, but you've got to remember what it was like for France in the 20th century. So France was on the winning end of two wars, the First World War and the Second World War. But in the first phase of both wars, they did not fare very well.
Right.
Eventually, they had their former commander-in-chief, Charles de Gaulle, become president. And even the final years of his presidency were mired in controversy with the riots in the late 1960s led by students. So to kind of compensate for a lot of that, I think they do have a bit of a military tradition going on, trying to accent their military credentials. That's the way I would explain it. And there is a strong association between France and the United States that goes back to the War of Independence, or as I call it, the War of Ungrateful Insurrectionists in America.
We've had this argument before.
There is a bit of a French-American connection. We all know about Lafayette from the documentary Hamilton. And so there's that kind of connection, but I don't think anyone's doing it on the French president's birthday. And it's something that's now become established in France, but I think for a variety of reasons, it tends to be foreign to the American culture.
It is very foreign to the American culture. I guess the real test is going to be, does Trump try to do this again? Maybe next year on his birthday. I don't know. Although this one apparently was kind of an embarrassment. So maybe it's out of his system and he doesn't want to endure that again. Let's talk about the other thing that happened this weekend in the U.S., at least that got a lot of attention. And that is there were an approximate 5 million people who protested in different cities around the U.S. Against Trump's policies on numerous fronts, his immigration policy, maybe his tariffs, his not abiding by the Constitution, suspending due process for all kinds of people detained in these ICE raids. And the unifying theme of all of these protests was no kings. And in some cases, there were some Christian signs held up as well, like, I have no king but Jesus. It's obviously deeply rooted in American identity that we do not have a monarch. As you mentioned, we go back to the revolution / war of, how'd you put it? Colonial...
ungrateful insurrectionists.
There you go. Ungrateful insurrectionists. I'm sure people will love that. You can send your hate mail to Mike Bird at Australia. It's still part of the Commonwealth.com. So what's your take on the protests? Because there's some people who feel like this is a righteous act of resistance against tyranny, and others who feel like protests, that's unbecoming of Christians. We should submit to the ruling authorities even when we disagree with them. And this kind of action is not what the New Testament sanctions us to do. Where does Mike Bird fall on that?
Well, the right to petition and protest is one of the main rights of a liberal democracy. And petitioning and protesting is far better than taking up arms to overthrow a government where there's no democratic processes. So petition and protest and, voting in your members of Congress, Senate, and the presidency, that's how we deal with political problems rather than resorting to violence. So yeah, petition and protesting, I think, is a good thing. It's a way of participating in a liberal democratic discourse and the way we deal with our problems by publicly meeting together with like-minded individuals to voice our grievances against policy. Now, there's a lot of policies you can critique Trump on. Obviously, the immigration one is the big one, and I think America is caught between, on the one hand, people who want open borders, and on the other hand, people who want mass deportations now, to use their own language.
To be fair, I think the vast majority of us are somewhere in between those extremes.
Exactly. And I think that's the reality. You need to enforce immigration law, but you've also got to deal with the reality. And this is where I thought, George W. Bush's the Dreamers Act, where they created a pathway for people who were here, particularly who were brought into America as children, and how they could find a pathway to citizenship. So there are things you can do in the middle, and that's the challenge. How do you find something which staves off both extremes? Probably the biggest problem, or the most concerning thing I've seen, was the administration's attitudes towards habeas corpus. Now, for those who don't know Latin, habeas corpus means show me the body. Okay, that's the idea that the government just can't send guys with a black van in a black suit and grab people and not tell you where they are. They can't kill them, torture them, or just exile them to another country. The king cannot do that. And this comes down to one of the most basic civil rights. I'd have to double check, but I think it might even be in the Magna Carta, or if it's not in the Magna Carta, there's a long tradition of this, particularly in the British legal system, that the monarch, the magistrate, they just can't go around randomly grabbing people off the street. And, this is one of the most important laws, okay? This means you can't get a knock in the night and be dragged away like the Stasi did in East Germany, or the KGB did in the Soviet Union, or what they've done in Cuba or in North Korea or China and other places. But the minute you say, habeas corpus, it's overrated, or look, there's a lot of exceptions to it, and we're just kind of that, or we're just going to flat out ignore it. I would say out of everything that the Trump administration done, their attitude towards habeas corpus is the number one most concerning thing, because you can tell a lot about a government by the way it relates to habeas corpus. This is a law that should have near sacred status.
And the way they justify it, at least what I've heard, is, well, we're only taking people who aren't citizens who should be deported anyway. But it's a circular argument, because how do you know they're here illegally unless they have a day in court
where
exactly.
charges are brought against them and they have a chance to defend themselves. Habeas corpus just says we're doing what's right and don't second guess us. Don't allow the courts to see this. So this check on monarchical power that goes back to the Magna Carta, that is a foundation for American law as well, it is critical. Where do you see, I mean, everything we've talked about up to this point has been largely just politics, secular law, and the norms of a pluralistic democratic society. Where do you see these kinds of values rooted in Scripture? Why should we advocate as Christians for something like habeas corpus?
Well, I think it comes down to the commands of Jesus to love your neighbor. Now, your neighbor, regardless of whether they are someone who was born in America, someone who has, migrated legally, whether they're undocumented or not, you still have to love their neighbor. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a particular view of, immigration law. There'll be a diversity of views about immigration law and how you secure a border and everything else. But you are required as a Christian to love your neighbor, irrespective of their migrant status in America or their citizenship. And to love your neighbor means you at least, in the very least, have to make sure they are treated fairly and equally before the law. So nobody can just be dragged and taken away. Everyone has the right to judicial review. Even if they are an undocumented migrant, maybe they have a legitimate reason for being there. Maybe they've got a refugee visa that is in the process of being expedited. Maybe they've simply overstayed. Oh, look, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons we could go into. But yeah, everyone's got that right. So I think, you're not required to simply sign off on anyone's immigration policy, left wing or right wing. But, the idea that you should love your neighbor and love means equality before the law, I think that's a pretty good inference.
Yeah, I think I agree entirely. The idea that we can debate what the laws ought to be is one thing. The idea that the law should be equally applied, whatever it is, to everyone, is what we should agree on. And beyond what you've already said, there's both Old Testament and New Testament argument that God does not show favoritism and that laws are to be applied impartially. That's one of the significant contributions of the Mosaic law, is that there is to be no favoritism, whether someone is enslaved or someone is a nobleman. The law applies equally to them. And we get the command in the New Testament to not show favoritism because someone has wealth or power in the church, but to treat all with equality. So these ideas of human dignity before the law and equal treatment before the law are deeply rooted in our faith. And yet the irony is that there are a lot of evangelical Americans who don't seem to mind that we're no longer applying the law equally because certain people don't deserve it, which is a flagrant contradiction of our Christian faith.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you abolish equality before the law, you've got the problem of when that equality, is abolished for you.
Yeah.
So,
but there's the assumption it won't ever happen to me or my group, so it's okay.
Exactly. And if you think, I want to get rid of equality before the law, well, be careful what you ask for, because if you give the tyrant a big stick, that stick can be used on you.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people, and this isn't just true on the MAGA right, but I think there are some people on the left who are also...
Oh, definitely.
They're also souring on the principles of a democratic, pluralistic society, and they also want more of an authoritarian instinct to push their policies and agendas.
I've seen that in places as well. Yeah, but it's not just on the conservative right. There are progressive left wing attempts for a more top-down, state knows best type of government, and you can see that in various places around the world.
Exactly. So as we wrap up, I'm curious, as you've done this work of studying some of these different regimes around the world and the way Christians are reacting to them, what advice or wisdom would you give to believers here in the United States, regardless of their particular politics, about how we ought to be responding in this moment? Obviously, things are not as terrible here as they are in many parts of the world, and whatever discomforts or quote-unquote persecution we face is insignificant compared to what many of our sisters and brothers are dealing with overseas. But certainly, the global church is a witness to us and gives wisdom to us about how to deal with stewarding and protecting the privileges and rights we do have in the United States. What would you say?
I've got two pieces of advice. Number one is you've got to differentiate between what are the limits of presidential power and what is the stuff I just wish I could stop Donald Trump from doing. So I think often they get confused. What are the real limits of presidential power and what's the stuff I wish I could stop Trump from doing? So I think if you can differentiate those two questions, you'll lead to a far more nonpartisan approach to it. The second thing I would say is if you do see things which are concerning, like the president is becoming more like a monarch, the way his birthday is celebrated with pomp and militarism, if you see things like habeas corpus being suspended or being wrongfully derogated, then as Timothy Snyder says, do not obey in advance. Okay. Don't think it's like, well, there's nothing you can do. I might as well go along with it. You know, within a liberal democracy, there are ways to petition, protest, file claims with courts. There are ways of fighting back. Don't assume you can't beat City Hall, or you can't beat the deep state, or you can't beat, you know, the elites or whoever they are. There are always means of response open to you. So don't obey in advance. So that's the two bits of advice I would give.
Okay, let me go deeper into that second one, because it came up earlier in a conversation I had with Phil and Kaitlyn, my colleagues on the show. The most immediate way to respond is obviously to vote for candidates that are going to uphold the Constitution, the rule of law, all of those kinds of norms. I think most Americans understand that, even if they don't all do it. I think you and I had a conversation earlier about mandatory voting in Australia versus the US. Let's put that aside. Before we get to another election, which is still, almost a year and a half away, most Americans who oppose what this government is doing feel like their only recourse is protest. My question to you is, how effective do you think that is? This is what I asked Kaitlyn and Phil earlier. And part of my reason for asking is I have many friends who are protesting, and I get the sense of solidarity that they find with others when they gather in public to do these things. But for the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of different protest movements in this country, both from the right and from the left, for different reasons. And do you feel like these things actually move the needle anymore? Or is it just for media consumption? Because I'm not sure it actually is having the same impact that it maybe did a generation or two ago.
Oh, look, it depends on the protest. I mean, do you remember the Occupy Wall Street protests?
Oh, yeah.
You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
That they didn't really achieve a lot in the end.
Exactly.
Exactly. They didn't achieve a lot in the end. But think about the civil rights marching of Martin Luther King.
Well, that's what I mean. That felt like a generation or so ago, and it did have an effect. But I'm looking at the last 20 years going, which protest movement has made a difference? And we had the Women's March, the Me Too March after Trump was inaugurated back in 2017. We've had Occupy Wall Street. We've had BLM. We've had the Tea Party movement. There's been a lot of protest movements in the last 20 years of American politics, and I don't see any of them being as effective as the ones from the 1960s were.
Yeah, what I think you've got to remember when it comes to protest movements, you need to play the long game. If you think you're just going to come out, wave some flags, have a long march, and then, you know, the next morning the world will suddenly be sunny with children riding unicorns, and there'll be, you know, butterflies delivering bananas to everyone. That's not going to happen. Most of these movements have some kind of grievance, and it takes a long time for due process to happen, for attitudes to change, or for the penny to drop. So I think for a lot of these movements, it's not, if you're waiting for an overnight success, it's not going to happen. You have to play the long hand. Let me give you one example. Mm-hmm. It took a long time to overturn apartheid in South Africa. You know, there was protest sanctions both in the country and externally for decades.
Right.
Okay. So whether we're combating Christian nationalism or a type of progressive authoritarianism, you know, you've got to play the long hand. You've got to play the long hand.
I agree. There needs to be patience and persistence. Maybe part of what's changed in modern culture with the internet and social media is our attention span just isn't as long. We go
from one cause to another.
Yep. Right. And so it feels more, I have a sense that if Trump is not in office come 2029, a whole bunch of people are just, they're done now. Okay, wipe our hands of that one. Thank goodness we can move on. And there were other people who were super upset when Biden was in office and they were protesting and literally storming the Capitol. And then Trump gets reelected and it's like, okay, we're done. We got what we wanted. And it's just this temporary partisan kind of turning of the tide. And the protests aren't for something more substantive and prolonged. Like, I don't see people gathering and protesting for comprehensive immigration reform to solve this broken system that's hurting a lot of people. They're protesting, rightly so. I'm not against it because of the abuses of this administration and ICE and the loss of due process and all those things for sure. But those things are all happening because we have a broken immigration system that we have not had the patience and political fortitude to fix. And there's plenty of blame to go around on that. But yeah, maybe you're right. It's just we need to pick something that is worth our time, energy, and effort and stick with it for the long haul to see it change.
Yeah, otherwise you're going to be ending up, one day you'll be saying save the whales, next day it's set Britney free, after that it's protect the world's ailing plankton population, and then it's no more nuclear. Rather than focus on the cause du jour, focus on a cause that you need a long-lasting settlement and commit yourself to it in the long hand. For me personally, my cause is the gambling lobby in Australia. In Australia, the gambling lobby is like Planned Parenthood and the NRA combined. I mean, they're just that the mendacity and malevolence of this lobby group, and it's taking a long time, and we're gradually eating away at their power in our political sector.
Oh gosh, maybe I need to have you back on for another conversation about gambling because I don't know how aware you are of this situation in the US, but the proliferation of sports gambling is destroying young men especially. So that'd be interesting to talk about that from a Christian perspective.
I call them the gambling cartels, and they in Australia they have the same power as drug cartels. It is sick and silly. But next time, we'll have you back. And you're going to stick around because we're going to do a bonus segment for Holy Post Plus, more theological. We're going to talk about open theism to continue off of a question that I got recently from a listener. And if you're curious about that and you're not yet a Holy Post Plus subscriber, go to holypost.com, sign up, and you can get access to this bonus conversation along with the mountains of other things that we post there, including Mike Bird's series, Christ and Caesar, about all of the different things happening around the world with the persecuted church. Mike Bird, thank you for being with us. Great to be with you, Skye, and all of your listeners.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much, much more.